So here's sort of our agenda. We're going to have an interactive activity here at the end where you'll be able to put your hands on the new indicator and have a little interactions with it to look at your cities, different places, and see how redlining has been affecting your locations still. So here's a little bit about us for folks who may not be as familiar. First of all, for those who are new and returning, thank you. Welcome once again. We're Greenlink Analytics. We're an Atlanta-based 501c3, and we're dedicated to using data for good. We're working with cities and community-based organizations across the U.S. to help create a more socially and environmentally equitable future. And then our GEM platform, which we're going to be working in today, was created to help people working in the ground and on the field have a quick and easy access to data to help them make informed decisions. We're currently working with 60 cities and 83 community-based organizations. And currently we're sitting with 584 active members and growing all the time. And for those who are not members, we will be sharing the links later to help you get signed up. We'd love to have you. A big thank you to our GEM Leadership Committee. They help us with facilitating these community practices and help build GEM into the best tool it can be. They're very instrumental in helping us advance. So our community of practice is a monthly meeting space to connect people working on and using data and relationships to advance climate equity. We know that data doesn't tell the whole story. So tools like GEM are very critical. Each month we host different offerings to make sure that folks are connecting and better equipped to tackle the tasks of equity in the social and climate space within their community. And without further ado, I will pass it off to Minna and Shar, and they're going to speak with you about redlining and then give us a little show of the new indicator.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel. Hi, everyone. It's great to have you all on. We've got a good group here today. So as Daniel was talking about, my name is Minna Toloui. I work with Upright Consulting Services, and we are strategic equity consultants working mostly in the sustainability and economic mobility and racial justice space. So we've been working alongside Greenlink Analytics for a few years now, working on the Greenlink Equity Map platform that Daniel just told you about and that hopefully you all are familiar with. And if you're not, we put the link in the chat and you will hopefully be able to access that. And we're going to play with the actual Greenlink Equity Map a little bit later in this session. So you all probably came here because you saw the word redlining, and some of you maybe know what that means and some of you don't, but we're going to just do a little quick intro to make sure we're all on the same page about what redlining is and then kind of why we care about it right now. So redlining is it was a race-based classification system. It began in the 1930s. And so it was used to basically prohibit federal investment in communities that were mostly folks of color and encourage investment in predominantly white communities through basically determining if and how loans were given to folks in those communities. And so these federal lending agencies actually created these maps for different, for all of the major metropolitan areas in the country. And they were graded basically from A to D, A being highly desirable, and these are all white communities, and then B, C, D, and D were areas with mostly folks of color and particularly Black, Japanese, and some Eastern European people. And those areas that were marked D were also marked in red, hence the word redlining, And they were deemed hazardous, quote, hazardous for investments. So you can see this map here. This is just a sample. This is a map of Philadelphia. But mostly what I want you to take from this is just the different ways that the neighborhoods are kind of carved up. And you'll see that there's red and yellow, and that's kind of where redlining comes from. So these neighborhoods that were deemed red were not really able to secure funds for purchase or real estate or upkeep. And so sort of a cycle of disinvestment was started through these redlining maps. Go to the next slide, please. Cool. So just to give you a little sense of what the key looked like, you can kind of see the grades, and then there's another sample map of Detroit here on the right, just to give you a sense of like what it actually looked like for these maps. And they called them the residential security maps. So you can kind of get a sense of what folks were thinking they were doing. So let's go to the next slide. So we want to talk a little bit about the impacts of redlining and what these maps that were created in the 30s, but still kind of have impacts through to today, and what that means for us. So as we talked about, disinvestment, racial segregation, really, these maps really doubled down on that. And because of these borders that were drawn and the lack of investment in communities of color, especially in the inner cities, this contributed to white flight, which is this phenomenon of white folks of all classes kind of moving out from the disinvested city centers into the suburbs and creating the suburbs. And what this pattern of investment and disinvestment did was lock in a home ownership and wealth gap between white communities and white people and communities of color. And that wealth gap and that home ownership gap carries on and has impacts through today. And the way that the disinvestment really impacted the inner cities left folks with not that many resources, with sort of crumbling infrastructure, things like that. And then as demand, more recently, as demand to move back into cities and be closer to amenities, as that demand has grown, folks have been displaced. Lower income folks who've lived there for a long time have been displaced in a process we call gentrification. And that has been, as you all probably are familiar with, a huge issue across the country. We'll get into that in just a second. If we could go to the next slide. So why is this important, right? Like, these maps are gone. These redlining technically is not in policy anymore, but why do we still care about this? Again, that increased demand to live near city centers, it's still happening now, has contributed to extreme demographic shifts, displacing longer-term residents who have been in these disinvested areas, while actual investment that has started has improved neighborhood amenities. So these neighborhood amenities are improving in some of these formerly redlined areas, but folks who've lived there and who are longtime residents are being priced out. And so it has really created a shift and a wave of displacement of folks of color and low-income folks from city centers. And that is largely connected to the housing crisis that I think anywhere we are in the country, we know about and are experiencing, especially in urban areas. And at the same time, the historically desirable grade A neighborhoods, they're still exclusionary because of the prices have stayed high, and there's a lot of opposition to developing more housing and more affordable housing. So while folks are being pushed out of lower income areas and formerly redlined areas, the formerly yellow lined or blue lined or green lined areas are staying that way. And we also think that redlining data can help us look at what the changes over time that we see in data that we're also going to see in the gem maps, like what that could actually mean. So, we want to be able to see part of the history of a place using some of the redlining data and have that influence how we look at the eviction rates, the income rates, other indicators in the communities today. So this is going to give us kind of a historical context that could help us understand what's going on. And at the same time, it's important to note that some communities, and I'm in the Bay Area in California, it definitely applies here to where I am in Berkeley. Some communities are so deep into a process of gentrification that targeting resources to formerly redlined areas can actually have an inverse effect and actually can accelerate the process of displacing low-income homeowners and folks of color, because the pressures are already so high on those redlined areas because the housing was more affordable. But now, as the process has gone, is so deep into a gentrification process that targeting resources to that formerly disinvested area can actually have negative impacts if there's not an intentional initiative to protect the folks who have been living there. So it's also good to understand that and understand what areas are formerly redlined and what things look like today. And so lastly, just want to mention, these policies, as we talked about, these redlining policies, or these redlined maps that determine these economic and lending policies, these were based on race and ethnicity. And so the impacts that we're seeing today that are leading to inequities, the solutions to those issues must also really lean into understanding race and ethnicity and having solutions based on that indicator. So I'm going to pass it off to Shar, the data magician here, and she is going to walk us through what it actually looks like to use this data in the maps.
Yeah, thanks, Minna. So hi, everyone. Just to introduce myself real quick. My name is Shar. I work at Greenlink Analytics, and I am a data scientist specifically related to our GEM platform. So all the cool data sets that you all are able to play around with, or maybe in the future able to play around with, I work on the back end of all of those. So I worked on creating this redlining layer, which I'm going to go through with you all right now, and then I will demo it. So very excited. So just to start, I just have a screenshot of the residential security map from back in the day. Minna showed one earlier, but I just wanted to reiterate this just to give some context here of just how these looked. So again, this is for Atlanta, and I have the legend on the right-hand side. So as we can see, the different grades were literally those colors. So redlining was literally these red boundaries or areas on this map. So yeah, Daniel, next slide, please. So I just wanted to, before we go into the GEM demo, just talk a little bit about what we did here, and just a brief intro to the methodology. So what we did was we took the historical residential security maps, the redlining maps, and we translated them to current day census tract boundaries so we could try to understand how redlining relates to our neighborhoods today. Specifically, what we did was we calculated the ratio of these different grades. So for example, what % of a census tract today was redlined. So I have an example that I put on this slide here. So all the orange areas that you see on the map were areas in Atlanta that were redlined once upon a time, whether it be 0% redlined or 90% redlined, they all show up as one color on the map. However, when you go in and hover over a particular census tract or neighborhood, you're able to see the particular breakouts of ratios based on the different grades. So as Minna mentioned before, grade D, also known as hazardous or redlined from the redlining maps, it'll show the percentage breakout for that particular census tract. So as we can see here, I'm just highlighting census tract 44, which I believe is in the Pittsburgh neighborhood in Atlanta. And it was 65% redlined and 0% for all the other grades. So it allows us to basically understand the lasting impact that redlining has on some of our communities today and the degree to which redlining occurred. All right, so Minna already went over some of this, but I just wanted to real quick touch on how the redlining data set can be used in your work, just to reiterate before we go into the GEM demo. So redlining will help us understand how historical inequities still contribute to inequities today. The redlining layer represents a fingerprint of inequity from decades ago. So we can still feel those effects today. So it'll really allow us to understand and trace the historical legacy of racial segregation over time. So this can help with current day equity and social justice projects. So I just listed a couple of bullet points to summarize here, but contextualizing areas of disinvestment, supporting certain community engagement projects, shedding light on structural racism, linking historical housing policies with present day health inequities. So that could be if you have really high asthma prevalence and historically high renter population in an area, maybe why is this happening? So it can help contextualize that a little bit. And then understanding deepened neighborhood racial segregation, just like Minna mentioned. So these are just a couple points. But again, as we go through this data set and go into breakout rooms especially, we are very interested on how you all think that you might use this data set too. So we're really open to hearing that feedback from you all. So without further ado, I'm gonna share my screen and go through a little bit of a demo before we go into breakout rooms. So just give me a quick second. All right, can you guys see this okay? Just give me a thumbs up. Okay. All right, so I'm in Atlanta. So for those of you that haven't seen GEM before, I just went in and in the search bar typed in Atlanta, Georgia, and it brought me to this area. And I can put in on the city boundary. So that's what the city of Atlanta looks like here. And under equity indicator 1, we have our redlining layer. So right now it's called historic redlining in here. So if I just go ahead and click on that, it'll populate redlining for Atlanta. So again, what we did here was translate the historic redlining maps to current day census tract boundaries, specifically the ratio for each tract. But when you first click on the redlining layer, it'll show you all the areas that are redlined, and then you're able to kind of drill in one step further as you hover over these areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hover over a couple of areas here to show an example. So right now I have grade D, which is hazardous, and what we know is redlining on the map. So if I hover over, it'll show not only grade D, but it will show the breakouts of every other grade, A, B, and C as well. So we can see that this neighborhood is 86% redlined, but if I go up to northern Atlanta, we tend to see a little bit less of redlining, which is kind of what we know historically. So we can see that this area, census tract 92, is only 6 or 7% redlined almost, but also has a little bit of grade D and C in here as well. And another thing I wanted to show you guys is we have these radio selector buttons. So you're able to select between grade B, grade A, and grade C, and similarly look at the map just like that. All right, so then one other thing I wanted to show you all, and we have the legend on the right here, the right-hand side here, that explains basically what Minna and I were going through, just a quick summary of the data set and kind of where it comes from. And then it has a legend to show, okay, areas that are orange are the areas that are redlined, areas that are this cream color are not redlined. So one last thing I wanted to go through is this overlay feature, because we're not just going to be looking at the redlining maps, most likely. We're going to be trying to understand the intersectionality between redlining and other indicators that we have in the platform. So let me just go down to asthma rates to really understand how redlining and asthma can be overlaid with each other. So if we look at this grid, I have the legend on the right-hand side here. So areas that are this really dark yellow color have been historically redlined, but also have really high asthma rates. So if we're trying to contextualize maybe why there are really high asthma rates in this area, was it linked to redlining? Could it be linked to redlining? This is a really good way to start to understand that. And again, we'll be going through this in our breakout rooms, but you're able to do this with energy burden and some other indicators that we have in here. So if I select the renter occupied indicator that we have in here, areas that are really dark yellow, again, are areas that have historically been redlined and have a really high renter population as well. So yeah, so that's the big overview of the redlining indicator. Again, we're going to be going through this in breakout rooms, so you all will get a chance to play with it yourself on your own screens. And one last thing I just wanted to touch on here is you can go ahead and download the data similar to our other indicators. So if you wanted to see the percentage breakouts for each census tract, you're able to download that to your own file. So yes, thank you everyone, and look forward to the breakout rooms.
Elena, your name is listed as Irene, but I know you're not Irene. You have a question. Could you voice it?
Yes. Hi, Minna. Good to see you again. And hi, everybody. I am Elena, not Irene. I did use her link to be able to join this call. So really exciting to see this data. I think it's awesome, especially for cities. I'm so excited about this data set. I was wondering if, I'm not sure if you already explained this piece, but one part that was confusing to me was just the HOLC, the Hulk grade, and how that was defined. I understand you're taking like previous historical redlining, but how is that, yeah, what does that Hulk grade mean? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so these were designations that the HOLC was the, oh shoot, I forget the, Mina, do you remember the actual abbreviation?
Homeowners Loan Corporation?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Homeowners Loan Corporation. So back in the day, around the 1930s, so 1938 is kind of when they came out with these maps. And so basically a group of people, this corporation came together and created these different grades because they were essentially told to create a mortgage or a way to designate mortgage lending system in the United States. So they basically went into these areas and designated them as these particular grades based on the racial demographics that they saw in that area specifically. So even if there were people that were well off and looked good on paper, because of their race, they were denied loans. So that's kind of how they designated these different groups. And I'm happy to provide some extra details on exactly what they designated these grades as. So there's A, B, C, and D, and we provided the brief explanations, and maybe in the breakout rooms, we can go in depth a little bit on what they meant.
Okay.
But
yeah,
does
that's helpful. I was wondering if, so that's all historical data. So the thing that you're overlaying is additional indicators. You're only overlaying the additional indicators that were linked below. You didn't add anything else to that data set. Did I understand that?
Yeah, okay. Correct. So the redlining layer is just what historically was there. We did not change the data set at all. So whatever you're seeing on the map is essentially what we basically just translated the historical maps into current day census tracts. That's really what you're seeing. So there was no other indicator necessarily added to that, or we didn't weight it in a certain way. But what I was showing in that overlay was taking another one of our indicators and essentially combining it, just like that's another feature that we have in GEM, is to overlay those layers so we can try to contextualize areas of disinvestment, basically.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Can I add a point to that real quick, Shar? Just wanted to, and one of the reasons we went back and forth on this methodology, but the way we wanted to visualize it is because we wanted to maintain continuity of a historic data set, but the actual labels in there are not to be representative of anything that we are trying to induce within the map. So we're not saying like current day, this is a more desirable or less desirable like neighborhood. This is just following what was labeled in the past. So it's not indicative of current day. We were just trying to show you what the patterns, how those labels in the past have had impacts on the patterns of other clusters of inequities today. So just want to be very clear about that. That's why we visualized it this way too. So
It looks like there's a question, Ronnie.
Yeah, hi. I was a little late, so sorry if I missed this, but can you speak to the coverage of the US you have right now? Specifically, I work in Colorado, so this is very, very interesting, and also would be amazing if there was resources for Colorado specifically.
Yeah, so the coverage right now is for 202 cities. And that is just what the historical data is available for. So this comes from the University of Richmond Digital Scholarship Lab. And so they have been georectifying is the word that we use in the geospatial world, but basically taking these old maps and converting them to digital copies. And they've only done that list of in case anyone's curious. However, not off the top of my head. I am not aware, and we can look in GEM in your breakout room as well to see what the coverage is for Colorado. These are for, like Minna mentioned, the major metropolitan areas. So Denver most likely has one, but yeah, it just depends on the city we're working with.
Okay, great. And then it sounded like when you're doing the census tract level, so you're mapping those old historical boundaries, but you're using the current unit of census tracts.
Exactly.
Did you already update to the 2020 geographies?
No, not yet. So yeah, we're currently using the 2010 census tract.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if we do not have any more questions, we can go into breakout rooms. Real quick before we do that, I wanted to share, we've created a special login for folks who may not have GEM access for today. I'll put that up here. So you can go to gem.equitymap.org and use the login redlining at greenlinkanalytics.org. And then you see the password is capital GR33NLINK, Greenlink. And you'll be able to get access today so that we can all sort of together play around with redlining and GEM in general. And so I'll give you guys a couple minutes here for everybody to get that logged in. I'll leave that up. And
Also in the chat if you want to copy paste it.
Thank you very much for that, Minna. All right. Yes, yeah, if you do have your own logins, go ahead and use those. This is just for our couple of our folks that may not be signed up yet, and we will be getting those resources to you in chat and then in a follow-up email if you would like to explore getting in with GEM with a membership. All right, if everyone is ready, Sammy, if you could open up the rooms and we will go and do a little work.
Okay, all the rooms are open.
Different things they would like to share. know, with us, Jelly gave us a great history of Kansas City and like different neighborhoods and stuff that were redlined and the issues that they still face. We looked at Birmingham and Atlanta and Kansas City. Say, Char, where did y'all end up looking at?
We looked at St. Petersburg, Florida. We looked at a bunch of areas in Connecticut, specifically New Haven, which we also found out doesn't have that many trees in it. But yeah, no, we had a really good discussion. I think the main thing was that everybody really understood in the sense that it made sense. Like what we were looking at on the map made sense to what people thought was happening in their communities, and also just talked about some ideas of, you know, what other indicators to maybe overlay this with, you know, looked at racial demographics, asthma, tree canopy cover, just to really help contextualize, you know, historical effects or impacts on what's going on today. So we just brainstormed a little bit on how this data set could be used.
Great.
We had an interesting conversation. We looked mostly at Austin, which, as many of you maybe know, there's been a lot of gentrification happening in Austin. So folks, lower income folks and folks of color have been sort of pushed out from historical neighborhoods. And it was interesting because there were some things that were not necessarily, some census tracts that were not necessarily, had very low levels of redlining neighborhoods, but high levels of energy burden or other things, and vice versa. And so it was interesting to just think about like, what might we actually be seeing here? Because some of the areas that you might expect to have higher energy burden actually didn't. And so what does that mean? Does that mean that this historically redlined neighborhood might have been completely gentrified? And so maybe there's a mostly higher income folks there. So maybe energy burden is lower because of that. We don't know. And so we were talking about just the importance of partnering and cities kind of understanding what's really going on by partnering and talking to folks on the ground, because of, especially in areas where there is a history of displacement and gentrification, the data, the map isn't going to show us any kind of full truth. But it was really interesting to look at. And we also had some ideas on how we can make the map a little bit more clear of what areas were sort of more redlined versus less, because like the one census tract with like 1% versus 100% are the same color. So like, is it going to be useful if we kind of break that out? So we thought about that as well. But yeah, I appreciate my group for having some good critical conversations around what this data actually might be useful for.
Awesome. Well, as we're sort of wrapping up, I wanted to quickly mention we have a survey to let us know how we did with the kinds of things y'all would like to see in the future. It'd be really helpful if you fill it out. Do you have a second? Just a couple of questions so we can try to continue to make these community of practice workshops the best that they can be. All right, let's see, Elena, you had a question real quick?
Yeah, I don't know if it's already an indicator that you can click on right now, but I was wondering about if there's a way to look at energy infrastructure to find out like which communities have like power outages and maybe also like just need infrastructure upgrades to their energy systems. That might be something that could be valuable for cities. Kind of question/comment.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. We don't currently have that. However, always gathering what's useful to all of you. So yeah, if that's something that you find is useful and others as well, just let me know and I'll let Matt take it from here because he probably has something to say.
Just on that specific question, that's a thing that a lot of people are struggling with information about nationally, because the utilities are not required to report distribution level outages. One thing that we've been doing, I've been having a number of discussions with some academic partners where we're using satellite data to try to track where outages are at nighttime as a way to get around that, because you can see where the lights are not on. But it's some pretty heavy kind of machine learning modeling that has to go in, and some fancy satellite data that Shar knows far better than I do, how to play with all of that kind of stuff. But that's kind of, I think it's early days and partnerships for that, where there's been some initial data outputs for like Massachusetts, and in our case we did some work looking with Georgia Tech at some parts of Georgia. So we're trying to figure out like, how would you scale this to get a better sense of it? And it's still, we'd miss all of the outages that happen during the day, obviously, because of that. But it's kind of our first cut at being able to even see that kind of information at all.
Let's see, we had a question in the chat too, before we get out of here, as maybe this would be one for Shar. How many cities have access to this data, and how will it be rolled out for more cities?
Yeah, good question. So it's currently, the coverage is currently for 202 cities. And this data comes from the University of Richmond Digital Scholarship Lab. So as they release more data, they're basically taking these old school maps and geo-rectifying it, basically converting them to digital maps. And they've only done it for 202 cities so far. So as they come out with more, if they come out with more, we'll certainly make sure that we update our data based on that. But yes, currently 202 cities.
All right, well, thank y'all. If you have no more questions, or I guess ask any more questions here real quick before we get out. We're getting close to the line. Thank you all so much for joining us. I hope we'll see you in our future ones. Our next is going to be on March 23rd. And you'll be getting information here shortly on topic and what we'll be going over. And we'd love to have you back then. So thank you for being here with us today. Y'all have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.